Being able to create and use lists is of course important, but unless you're starting your QuickBooks company file from scratch, as in you've never had any customers, any sales, or any products, you might want to consider importing or converting existing data. Why? Well, simply it saves time, and it also can be more accurate. If you can convert something rather than retyping it, that has to be good. In this chapter, we'll talk about how you can convert and import data from existing sources into QuickBooks. Probably one of the biggest challenges to actually converting data is just that, converting the data, or do you have to manually re-enter it? Well, fortunately, QuickBooks has some tools that allow you to both import and convert existing data. So what can be converted? Well, the short story is basically any file that can be created as a text or spreadsheet type file. Now, I know that's very generic. I've worked with databases for, a little over 15 years now, and what I understand data as being is very basic, and as long as you can get your hands on the data, usually there's a way to convert it. But that's a little beyond what we're talking about here. For our purposes, we can do two things. We can take existing accounting files that have come from Quicken, Peachtree, or Microsoft Accounting as an example, and we can convert that information over into a new QuickBooks file. Secondly, we can also import information, most likely from an Excel spreadsheet, and we'll talk about both of these. So when you're talking about using other forms of software, basically Quicken 98 through 2009, Peachtree 2001 to 2009, and Microsoft Accounting, which could also be Microsoft Small Business Accounting before they changed the name, 2006, 2007, those can all be directly converted using a conversion tool. Or Quicken doesn't actually need the conversion tool because it's made by Intuit, so it kind of talks and works well with QuickBooks. There are differences between these software programs, so you're going to have to kind of get familiar with them, do a little bit of reading, which is all available on the website, to figure out exactly what's going to carry over and what's not. What's always important anytime you convert any data is to always verify your converted files. Make sure that you know what did come over, if anything didn't get converted, what that is, and then update the new file in QuickBooks to make sure you have an accurate start. When we talk about a Quicken conversion, as I said, that one's actually the easiest because Intuit makes both Quicken and QuickBooks, so they play well in the sandbox together, if you will. You always want to back up your original file, regardless of which one you're doing, because QuickBooks actually will not use the old data. It's going to create a brand new file, but just in case something gets tweaked out of place, you always want to have a backup of the original. As they say, "Thee who laughs last has a recent backup." The next thing you'll do is clean up your data by deleting anything you don't want converted, and then make any customer or vendor names consistent. Now that's important because when you convert over, you want to make sure you don't have duplicates. Basically, when you do a data conversion, you want to ensure that any erroneous data that you had or any duplicate data that you had isn't converted over so it carries through to QuickBooks. So do all the cleanup that you can. If you're working with a Peachtree conversion, this actually requires a conversion tool. But the good news is it's free and it's a download right from the Intuit website, and we'll go through that process. It's not a big deal, but it is something that will kind of let them talk to each other. If you think about it, Peachtree and Microsoft Accounting versus QuickBooks are kind of like people who speak a different language. The basis is the same, but there are slight differences within their languages, and so they don't always understand each other 100%. That's what the conversion tool is going to do for you. The conversion tool will be like a translator that can make sure that QuickBooks understands precisely what Peachtree and Microsoft Accounting are trying to say so you don't get errors in the conversion. When you work with Peachtree, a Peachtree version must be installed on your computer, and it can't be the Quantum 2007 version. Everything else works, but not Quantum 2007. Your Peachtree files must also be on the same local computer as the file you're trying to convert to, basically your local computer. And probably the biggest thing with Peachtree is deciding whether to use names or IDs for your customers and vendors. Probably the best recommendation is to stick with names, but that's a personal choice. You can do either one. And again, you want to remove any unwanted accounts prior to the conversion. When you convert from Microsoft Accounting or Microsoft Small Business Accounting, it also requires a conversion tool. You need to have the last service pack. Microsoft is always good about service packs, so make sure all of your Microsoft software is completely updated. And again, your files need to be on the same local computer. You also want to go through and do the same type of cleanup. The conversion tool itself is a free download. It's about 30 megabytes. It doesn't take too long to download, but you're going to download it first, and then you're going to install it because it is a piece of software. Then you're going to run the conversion tool from your start menu or your desktop, depending on where you installed it, and simply follow the instructions. The biggest thing to remember is that when you're working with the conversion tool, you want to save the new QuickBooks file that you'll be creating with a new company name and a new location, because if you save it with the same name and the same location as an old file, it will overwrite the original file, and that could be bad. And then, like I've said before, make sure you check the new file integrity. Make sure that everything converted correctly, and if it did not, make the corrections that you need to. Basically, whatever is converted is going to be the current state of your business. It converts all of your key lists, your balances, and your transactions if you want to, but you can choose whether to do the lists only or the lists with the balances and the transaction history. So you can kind of get a very clean start, or you can kind of just carry over from what you were doing before. Personal choice. Some people, when they change software systems, want to have a clean start without any of the history and things in it, and that's why that's available. And don't forget, the QuickBooks site, as well as the community, has a lot of details and a lot of white papers and other information that you can get, especially for your application-specific features. So if you want to know specifically what is and isn't converted out of Peachtree, go ahead and go to the website. We just don't want to duplicate all of that information here. The second type of importing or conversion that you can do is actually importing. Remember, there's a difference between converting old data and importing data. Basically, we're talking about importing anything in a spreadsheet format. Now, what can happen is you can have a proprietary system or your old system that will export the information to a spreadsheet format. That can be your intermediate point, and then we'll import that data into QuickBooks. In short, customers and jobs, vendors, items, and accounts can all be imported. I'm showing you here some of the different fields that are required. So for customers and jobs, as well as your vendors, basically all you have to have is a name, but you'll probably have some other information. For example, with your customers, you'll probably have an email address and their billing and shipping addresses, maybe the terms that they're on, those types of things. And for vendors, you'll probably also have what you want their check printed as, maybe an account number, and maybe their 1099 status. Items require type and name only, but again, you'll probably have type, name, and the tax line, because that's what we're interested in with those kinds of items. And lastly, for an account, the type, name, and account or income account are required, and you'll have all of those plus maybe a deposit to, quantity on hand, the purchase cost versus the sales price, and maybe even a tax agency. So when you import data, you want to have it cleaned up again in the spreadsheet, and then we'll go through an import process. It's always important to remember when you're importing that data types have to be the same. What you'll do is you'll actually map fields and say, this field in my Excel spreadsheet is the same as this field in QuickBooks. But QuickBooks also needs to have that be the same data type. In other words, dates to dates, numbers to numbers, text to text. Items that QuickBooks keeps on a list have to match exactly, and if they don't, when you do the import, it's going to create a duplicate. So you might print out your list from QuickBooks and kind of compare them to your spreadsheet before you start the import process in order to make sure that it's clean.